This podcast is brought to you by Tāmaki Paengahira, Auckland War Memorial Museum.
The ocean has always been a place of wonder. Vast, full of life, and essential to our survival. But pressures from human activity, pollution, and industrial fishing are unravelling its delicate food webs. At the top are seabirds, the storytellers of the sea, and they're sounding the alarm. Here in Tīkapa Moana, the Hauraki Gulf, lies one of the world's great seabird strongholds. 27 species breed here, nearly a third of all of those in Aotearoa. Yet their numbers have fallen by almost 70% since the first humans arrived here. Offshore wanderers have endured, but the birds we share our coastlines with, penguins, terns, gulls, shags, continue to decline. And it matters. Aotearoa holds the highest number of threatened seabird species in the world. Their fate is tied to ours, and the choices we make today will decide whether their voices still echo across the Gulf or fall silent. Kia ora, I'm Laura Skerritt, your host for this episode of The AMP, the podcast from Auckland Museum that amplifies the incredible stories from our collections, our mahi, and our place in the Pacific. In this episode, we explore the world of seabirds in the Hauraki Gulf, one of the planet's most important seabird habitats. With insights from Dr. Matt Rayner, we uncover stories of species in decline, like the Kawo tiki-tiki, spotted shag, and others adapting to human influence, like the karoro, southern black-backed gull. Drawing on the museum's collections and new research, we'll learn how seabirds reveal the changing health of our marine ecosystems, and why protecting the Gulf is vital for their survival and ours. New Zealand has long been a paradise for seabirds. Surrounded by rich, productive oceans and dotted with countless islands and coastal habitats, it's offered safe breeding grounds for millions of years. With no land mammals to threaten them before people arrived, seabirds flourished here in extraordinary numbers and diversity. The Hauraki Gulf, Te Moana Nui a Toi Tīkapa Moana in particular, is a globally significant seabird hotspot, with many endemic species relying on the area.
One of the most significant areas in all of New Zealand. It's incredibly culturally significant to Aucklanders, but also to mana whenua. It's of high economic importance. It's been valued at around $100 billion by a study conducted in 2017. And it's of really incredible biological importance as an area of high biodiversity.
That's Dr. Matt Rayner. He's a senior researcher of land vertebrates here at the museum.
It was an economic analysis of the ecosystem benefits, contributions of the Gulf, fisheries benefits and benefits to society. So they valued those resources in terms of what the Gulf contributes as providing clean water, providing kai moana, and providing a place of business for fisheries, for other operations. The 2017 study showed that the annual contribution of the Gulf to ecosystem services was around $2.7 billion, but the total asset value of the Gulf, ecological, economic and cultural, was around $100 billion.
This immense contribution shows how important and unique this coastline is to Aotearoa, and helps us learn more about our local seabirds and their evolving nature. So, how many species of bird have been discovered so far?
Because science is constantly discovering birds, there's about 10,800 species that have been documented globally. A very small proportion of those are seabirds, around 360 species. But what they don't make up for in taxonomic diversity, they make up for in sheer abundance, because the world's oceans are very huge. So, yeah, seabirds can include albatrosses and petrels, your gulls and terns, penguins, of course, cormorants and shags, and other groups such as skuas, gannets, and that sort of thing.
Around 90 species of seabird have been recorded in the Hauraki Gulf. That's a quarter of all the seabird species on Earth. And remarkably, 27 of them choose to breed here, including 3 found nowhere else in the world. But why here? Well, the Gulf offers what seabirds need: safe island breeding sites, a range of marine habitats, and rich feeding grounds. Seabirds are a vital part of this ecosystem, but their future is under pressure. Fishing, habitat loss, and the ever-increasing spread of our cities are steadily unravelling the food webs they rely on. They're called webs rather than a chain because most ocean animals eat multiple things and are eaten by multiple predators. When one part of this web is disrupted, it affects everything else. Although they return to islands to breed, many seabirds spend most of their lives, up to 80%, out at sea.
Funnily enough, seabirds are adapted to living on the ocean, and that means that many of them spend most of their lives out of sight of land. They're not just like the gulls that listeners will see on the coast. Many of our species cross the Pacific Ocean, and some, when they leave their colony as a chick, won't see land for up to 10 years, so they can live on the ocean, they fly on the ocean. Many species can drink seawater. We can't. If we do, we'll die, but they can excrete salt from their nostrils or through their internal organs. So they're supremely adapted. They can sleep on the surface of the sea.
As predators at the top of the food chain, seabirds are crucial components of marine ecosystems and have attributes that make them useful as indicators of change in the environment.
So in terms of seabirds in the Hauraki Gulf, the trajectory of seabirds has unfortunately followed much of the decline in the Gulf that we've seen, really over the last millennia. The biodiversity of the Gulf is a small fraction of what it was when people first arrived in Aotearoa. We've seen massive declines in seabirds, at least a 60 or 70% decline in seabird populations. In addition to seabirds in the Gulf, we've seen a 90% reduction in the number of whales. We've seen the total eradication of seals and sea lions from the Gulf, which were present before people were here. And in terms of the fish biomass in the Gulf, which seabirds feed on, we've lost around about 60% of the biomass of fish that were here before people arrived.
This is sadly a pretty familiar story worldwide. But what caused the declines?
These declines have been driven by our activities in the Gulf. Obviously, people arrived here around 1300, and there was some harvesting of Tīkapa Moana and seabirds, but the real impacts happened with the industrialisation of fishing that began at the beginning of last century, and particularly activities such as bottom trawling, which has had massive damage, huge damage to the Gulf. And this has driven a decline in many of the top predators, such as seabirds, who just simply haven't had enough food. The other thing that's affected seabirds is that, unlike things like whales, our seabirds need to come to land to breed. When our waka and our big sailing ships came over the horizon, we brought with us mammals, rats, cats, stoats. They love eating seabirds, and they got to most of these islands in the Gulf where big populations of seabirds were breeding and pretty much wiped them out. It's only in the past 20 years that we've actually seen a resurgence in those populations because we've eradicated mammals off those islands. So for some species of seabirds in the Gulf, their numbers have started to increase, but for others, they're still not doing so well. The natural history collections at Auckland Museum are an incredible resource for studying changes in our environment, and an incredible resource because of the ongoing time series of those collections for looking at the past to understand the future.
We're going to follow the stories of 2 seabirds, one that's thriving and one that's barely hanging on.
New Zealand is the world centre of shag or cormorant diversity. In North America they call them cormorants. Somehow in England and in New Zealand we call them shags. There's no real scientific reason for that, it's just kind of like a preference of name. We've got 9 species of shag in this country, and that's by far the most diversity of any country. Probably the next behind us is Australia, which is probably 4 or 5. So we've got a really high diversity, and the reason we have that diversity is the same reason why we have so many seabirds. Incidentally, New Zealand is also the world centre of seabird diversity beyond shags. We've got the most of nearly everything. That's because we're quite a big isolated island group that never had mammals, so the birds could come ashore and breed. But also there's a diverse coastline, we're surrounded by all these different currents, so there's lots of feeding habitat.
Today, there's a lot more appreciation for these beautiful seabirds, but sadly, this wasn't always the case.
So I became interested in researching birds that were resident in the Gulf, and particularly birds such as the kaua tiki, which really represent a marine canary in the coal mine. They're dependent on the Gulf year round, and they're stuck here and they're not doing well. Kaua tiki or spotted shag is a New Zealand endemic. It's quite abundant in the South Island, although we know its population is now declining. And it was abundant in the Hauraki Gulf up until about the 1960s. It's had a complex population trajectory. In the early 1900s, it was very abundant, many thousands of birds. And then people started shooting them because the fish life was declining. And so in the 1940s, a law was brought in to prevent that shooting, and the numbers came up a bit. But then from about the 1980s, the numbers have plummeted, and today we're down to about 150 breeding pairs of the birds in the Firth of Thames, which is a real concern.
Despite these dramatic declines, concern around the population of kaua tiki in the Hauraki Gulf was sort of eased by the idea that there are so many of the same species in the South Island. Matt worked with researchers at the University of Otago, Te Papa and Canterbury Museum to discover just how genetically distinct, if at all, the birds in the North and the South Island were.
The idea was to answer some questions around the populations in the South Island. But what we actually discovered, to our surprise, was that this little curious population we have in the Hauraki Gulf is actually genetically distinct from birds in the South Island. Not enough to make it a separate species, but to make it what managers call a conservation management unit, which means it would be bad if it goes extinct because it's got unique genes. So this is where our work on kaua tiki really started, because we knew we had this unique population that was declining fast. So we thought, how can we learn more about them and save them? So our first idea was a little bit crazy, but it had been done with other seabirds, and we wondered, so kaua tiki breed have one main breeding colony in the Firth of Thames. They had historically bred more widely in the Gulf, and particularly on the Noises Islands, where the museum has been doing quite a bit of work. So we worked with the Noises Island Trust to try and establish an artificial colony of spotted shags on that island.
The idea was to remind the birds this is still a great place to settle and raise chicks. So how do you get started with something like this? Thankfully, the team had some creative tricks up their sleeves.
It turned out we had a good collection of kaua tiki mounts, or stuffed birds, that had been collected from the Noises in 1913.
Back then, Auckland Museum's resident taxidermist Louis Griffin collected spotted shags, sadly by shooting them, for a diorama of a breeding scene some listeners might remember used to be on display in the museum. He couldn't have known that he was going to contribute to the conservation of the same species over 100 years later.
We still had those in the collection. So what we did in that project was use 3D scanning to scan those shags, print them, and then have volunteers paint them, and we put them out on the island at a site where kaua tiki used to breed. And then just to sweeten the deal, we put in a big sound system with the call of breeding birds calling, and sprayed fake poo around in the form of paint to see if we could attract birds back to the island.
This hadn't previously been tried with any cormorant species, but back in the 1990s it was tried with gannets on Mana Island, off the west coast of Wellington. First, they eradicated the pests. Then, 80 concrete decoy birds were placed on the island, and again, a bit of fake bird poo was added for good measure. In 2015, a lone gannet, nicknamed No Mates Nigel, spent 3 years courting one of the concrete decoys, carefully making her a nest. but heartbreakingly, he died just weeks after some real-life gannet mates finally turned up. Nigel might have had no friends in life, but his story went viral, even inspiring a song by Canadian band The Burning Hell.
They've all been making plans for Nigel, and by they I mean the ornithologists.
But how did the new colony for the Kawo Tiki fare?
Ultimately, it hasn't been successful. It's now been going for 6 or 7 years. Birds visited the colony within the first year, which was amazing, and we got video of them landing. But what we've realised slowly is that providing safe habitat isn't what the birds need. It's safety at sea and more food in the water. And that's where the research has moved from using our collections to build shag dummies to attract shags, to using the collections to understand the biology of the birds at sea, and using new technologies to understand that.
So, what happened next?
We realised we needed to follow the birds at sea, which is pretty difficult because the birds can fly all over the place. So we had to use new methods, and the first of those involved our collections held at the museum. So we used this little technique called stable isotope analysis. Isotopes are different variations of elements that have different molecular weight, but they can be used to track the diet and habitat that birds feed in.
The researchers extracted feather samples from spotted shags captured in the wild and safely released, as well as from birds held in museum collections around New Zealand, including again our specimens collected by museum taxidermist Louis Griffin back in 1913.
And to do that, we took feather samples from these old specimens held in the museum, and we compared them to feather samples over time up to the present day from birds we'd sampled in the field. And we could look at these stable isotopes, and that would tell us about the diet of the birds, and it would tell us about their foraging habitat.
The results were surprising.
What the isotopes showed us was that the level in the food chain that Kawo Tiki were feeding has declined over the last 100 years. It's gone less from feeding on fish, more to feeding on lower trophic level prey like squid. And that makes sense, right? We've seen a huge loss of fish in the Gulf, so the birds have had to adjust and try different things. We also found the isotopes told us that their foraging habitats have changed, most likely because of the damage we've seen from silt coming in and damage to benthic or rocky reef habitats that support fish life.
In a nutshell, over the last 150 years, the Kawo Tiki have been feeding further away from shore and eating fewer fish, while eating more of other animals lower down the food web than they did in the past.
The second part of this more modern study was following the birds at sea, and so we collaborated with Auckland Council scientists on this. We caught birds at their breeding colony in the Firth of Thames, and we attached fancy little tracking devices to the birds' backs. What these devices do, they're solar powered by a little solar panel. Whenever the bird that's flying around, it lands on the sea and it decides to dive, and Kawo Tiki can do hundreds of dives. They're a pursuit diver, they dive underwater to chase fish. Whenever the bird dove, the tag would measure how deep the dive was and how long it was. When the bird came to the surface, the tag would fix a GPS fix. And then when the tag was charged enough by the sun, it fires all the data back to my computer via the cell phone network. So it was pretty cool technology. So we collected a massive foraging data set on where the birds were going and foraging over 2 years. The birds we tracked, they were travelling hundreds of kilometres a day within the Firth of Thames area. They were doing between 150 and 400 dives a day. Most of the dives were shallow to about 4 metres, but the birds were quite capable of diving to 20 metres. Just incredible birds. Like most shags, they need to come out and rest because their feathers aren't completely waterproof, because what they do when they're foraging, they soak up a bit of water so they can dive more easily. But they then need to go somewhere to dry out. And listeners, if they have seen Kawo Tiki, they will most likely have seen them on the Thames coast, between Thames and Coromandel, where they sun themselves on the rocks, and it's a really important area for them. They love to forage on mussel farms, and there's probably a reason for that we know from other research by researchers at the University of Auckland and others that there's lots of fish in mussel farms. There's lots of lines with mussels on them, We destroyed most of the mussels. The Firth of Thames used to be one giant mussel bed along the bottom. And in the 1950s and 60s, there was a huge mussel dredging industry in the inner Hauraki Gulf. Nearly the whole Gulf was mussel beds. We dredged that out and mussels were pretty much exterminated by the mid-1960s. Probably one of the reasons that kaua tikitiki kept declining. Anyhow, the birds love mussel farms, but they also love certain areas of their range down on the Thames coast. And we became concerned that these were also areas that had quite a high degree of fishing from recreational and commercial fishers. And 2 of the birds in our study were actually drowned in nets. Since that time, we've been doing some work looking at the interaction of these birds with fisheries, which is a major area of concern, and we think that might be contributing to the decline of these birds.
So, what's next for the kaua tikitiki?
We now know that this little curious population in the Hauraki Gulf is genetically distinct from the rest of the country, which makes it even more worrying that it's endangered. We need to get a handle on how many of these birds we're killing in our nets. We think it's a real problem. Both the birds are potentially drowning in commercial set nets in the southern Firth, but we also don't know. We know a lot of people are using recreational nets along that coast. So we're going to be doing a citizen science project this spring where we have volunteers that are going to be doing surveys along the coast where the birds are roosting and just counting, are there nets, are people setting nets there near the birds that could be threatening them. So that's the real next focus of what's going on with our research.
Without the help of conservationists, Hauraki Gulf spotted shags could join the ranks of approximately 55 other extinct birds that have been lost since humans arrived on our shores. In contrast to the kaua tikitiki, the southern black-backed gull, karoro, has thrived in human-dominated landscapes. A study by Uniteg and Auckland Museum revealed the bird's adaptability and showed a dramatic shift in its diet over the past century, thanks to some fascinating scientific techniques and the museum's historical collections.
If the kaua tikitiki seems to be one of the losers in terms of what's going on in the Gulf, you could argue that the karoro seems to be one of the winners, although I will show you how it's not. Karoro are super abundant and they love feeding on our waste and our refuse, but it's not their historical role. And we wanted to, in this study, look at how the birds were using human food sources, and was there a difference between colony sites that were, say, closer to the city or further away.
When you think of gulls, you probably picture large cawing scavengers swooping down to snatch your hot chips at the beach, or tugging ferociously at bin bags. Opportunists these birds may be, but you've got to hand it to them. They're resilient survivors, uniquely able to adapt their behaviour and diet to a rapidly changing world. While often overlooked, new research is revealing just how remarkable these birds really are. Their story is one of flexibility and urban success.
So for our study, we looked at 3 aspects of the karoro biology. The first thing we used were what are called pellets. So basically when seagulls eat stuff, the stuff they can't digest, they regurgitate up. So if you go to where they congregate or you go to their breeding colonies, you can find these pellets on the ground and you can pull them apart and analyse what the birds have been eating. So my collaborator at Unitec used lots of volunteers to analyse many pellets from karoro at 3 sites. One in Western Springs Park in the city, in Auckland City, the major breeding colony on Rangitoto Island, on the lava fields there, and a further site further away from the city on Tiritiri Mātangi Island. So we were able to look at the diet across that range.
Coastal seabirds are like messengers from the sea. They can reveal when human activity is starting to change the ocean environments close to shore. In the past, karoro were coastal birds that hunted and scavenged in the ocean, eating fish, sea creatures like crabs and shellfish, and even the remains of mammals like sea lions. However, as Tāmaki Makaurau has grown into a sprawling city, the karoro's diet has expanded too. We
found, as we expected, that karoro eat a lot of human-based food, but they eat a mixed diet, marine invertebrates and fish, invertebrates and refuse. But the amount of refuse that they eat increases with proximity to the city. So the pellets from the birds at Western Springs Park and Rangitoto, just across the water from the city, were full of lamb bones, chicken bones, all sorts of stuff. Whereas the pellets on Tiritiri Mātangi had much more of a marine-based component in their diet.
What they eat now tells a bigger story about what's happening in the Hauraki Gulf. As marine ecosystems decline because of pollution, overfishing and urban runoff, native seabirds like karoro are forced to adapt, often in ways that lead to them living in our towns and cities among the hustle and bustle of daily human life. It's both fascinating and a bit sad how drastically our actions have reshaped these birds' lives. Today, they're just as likely to chow down on a discarded fried chicken drumstick or a roadkill mouse as they are to hunt for fish.
There was a second part to the study. So the isotopes came in here. So we were interested in how the diet of karoro has changed as Auckland City has developed over time. And obviously, more and more of us are sticking out our wheelie bins and food trash bags. So again, we turned to isotopes, and again, we turned to the collections, which we had a good record of karoro, specimens of karoro collected from the late 1800s to today. And what this showed us, again through the isotopes, is that the diet of karoro in the last century has swung hugely from a marine-dominated diet to foods from a terrestrial-based source, basically our rubbish.
Sadly, the adaptability of karoro is the exception, not the rule. Many other seabird species in the Hauraki Gulf are far more specialised, and they rely on healthy marine food webs to survive. As these ecosystems are degraded by pollution, overfishing and climate change, these less flexible species are struggling, and in many cases, declining. So while karoro can make do with fries and chicken bones, others like terns, petrels, shearwaters, shags and penguins can't. Their shrinking numbers are a warning sign that our actions are unravelling the natural balance of the Gulf.
We certainly know that certain groups of species are adapting their diet. We know that particularly animals like the karoro, or seagulls, around the world have been really good at adapting to human rubbish. I think in their natural environment they were quite adaptive. They fed on a broad variety of prey, from scavenging through to actively killing. There's been a recent paper published from California that showed a seagull similar to the karoro was tracked riding in a rubbish truck for about 80 kilometres in the truck while it was driving, feeding on the rubbish. So this is how adaptable these birds are. The problem is that the karoro gives a bit of a false signal. We look at these birds picking at our fish and chips and we think, oh, things are all right, there's lots of karoro around. But it's a false economy. A small number of species do well thanks to what we're putting out there, but unfortunately many other species like the kawo tikitiki are not doing well, and they're declining towards extinction. And the general health of the Gulf is declining towards a much poorer state.
Next time you see a karoro pecking at an overflowing bin, remember it's not just making do, it's adapting to survive in a world we've changed, and not all seabirds are so fortunate. Protecting the Gulf means fighting for the future of all our native wildlife.
Karoro is really an indicator for us that the balance is out of whack and the state of the environment is not good. So what really is next is hopefully more marine protection for bulk of biodiversity in the Gulf that's suffering.
The Hauraki Gulf Tīkapa Moana Marine Protection Bill has just been passed into law, which is a huge step forward in terms of marine protection. The new legislation will be in place before the end of the year and create a network of protected areas across the Gulf. Small sections of ocean set aside to regenerate, with the benefits flowing well beyond their boundaries. The goal is to make the Gulf more resilient to the pressures it faces every day, things like sediment washing in from the land, pollution, and the growing impacts of climate change.
It's been a culmination of over 12 years, more like 15 years of work by a huge number of Aucklanders and people around the country. The museum, Auckland Museum, has personally been involved in this through our work with the Norata Trust at the Noises, advocating for a marine protected area at the Noises Islands, which are in the outer reach of the inner Hauraki Gulf. We've been quite successful. I say we, a broad coalition of a huge number of people have been quite successful. It's going to bring in 19 new protected areas in total to the Gulf. It's going to result in 2 extensions to marine reserves at Hahei and at Goat Island. It's going to create 12 new high protection areas, marine protected areas, and also some seafloor protection zones.
We already know marine protection works. Places like Goat Island, Te Hawareamaki, Cathedral Cove, Whanganui Ahe, and the Poor Knights, Tawhitirahi, show us the difference it can make. But recovery doesn't happen overnight. It takes time. Time which sadly a number of our seabird species just don't have. And seabirds bring an extra challenge. They don't stay in one spot. While reefs and seafloor habitats can bounce back when protected, seabirds range widely across the Gulf and far beyond. To truly protect these species, we need to think on the same scale they live their lives, across the whole seascape, not just small pockets of it.
Complete blanket marine protection works, and it can work fast in terms of the recovery of species, and it needs to work fast. This whole journey towards marine protection has been travelling at the speed that a kina grazes because it has been so slow. We're talking about changing the area of protected area in the Gulf from about 0.3% to about 6%. Now, the global standard is 30%, and that is a global biodiversity framework that the New Zealand government has signed up to. The government will say that this new marine protection bill will bring in 18% marine protection, but unfortunately it's a little bit cheeky, we believe, because that includes seafloor areas that will be protected, but you can still fish the water column above them. So in terms of high protection, where generally no fishing is going to be allowed, it's about 6%. Of course, there's another issue that recently, to the dismay of conservationists at least, the government is going to allow ringnet fishing in 2 of those high protection marine areas.
Ringnet fishing is when a net with floats at the top and weights at the bottom is used to circle around a school of fish, then quickly pulled close to catch them.
It's been one step forward, half a step back for about 12 years over successive governments, and the action on marine protection in this country has been just glacially slow. And I think people are starting to realise that we're falling behind the rest of the world in that area, and we really need some action to catch up. The Gulf's too beautiful to allow this decline to continue. It's like the great last wilderness.
So what can we do to help seabirds? One way is by supporting fishing methods that don't damage our marine habitats, like trawling, which destroys the seafloor and kills or injures seabirds and marine mammals, what's known as bycatch. It also helps to be curious about where your fish comes from. Ask restaurants where and how the fish on their menu was caught. Or next time you're in the supermarket, check the labels and ask yourself the same sorts of questions. Take a look at the best fish guides online and only buy kai moana that is caught in a sustainable way. Or get political. Raise your concerns directly with your local MP and add your voice to the call for change. And protect seabirds out on the water and on islands. Be careful not to drive your boat through flocks of resting birds and respect biodiversity laws. Don't take your pets to islands where seabirds come to breed. Giving them safe, undisturbed places is one of the biggest gifts we can offer.
Biodiversity loss is the big challenge aside from climate change on the planet, and I got news for the public. It's going on right out there in the Hauraki Gulf. Nearly everything is declining, ongoing. Karoro, because it's adapted to our rubbish and eating our waste, it's doing all right. But for most other species, red-billed gull, white-fronted tern, the kawo tiki-tiki, korora, the little blue penguin, these species are declining in the Gulf. Once they're gone, and we're the world is poorer for it.
That was Manu Moana, A Bird's Eye View, brought to you by Auckland Museum, supported by the Tennyson Charitable Trust. Written, produced and hosted by me, Laura Skerritt. Sound designed by Sarah O'Brien, with production support from Annabelle Walker. The executive producer was Teresa Cowie from Connect Content. Thanks to our guest, Dr. Matt Rayner, and to bird sound archivist Les McPherson, who generously shared his recordings with us for this episode. To learn more about seabirds of the Hauraki, read Matt's blogs on our website, or find out more about the Hauraki Gulf Tīkapa Moana Marine Protection Bill, visit the links in our show notes. If you're enjoying the AMP, please help others to find us by sharing with friends or whānau, or leaving a review.